what we're going through now is the end of something. I think to a lot of people it feels like the beginning of something because that change is so painful to endure. The reality is this is the end of a build-up and a postponement of reckoning. But this fourth turning is chaos, it's destruction, it's the tearing down of institutions, and they don't get dismantled peacefully. It generally has to come through strife and conflict. I think there will be an immense crash, and it can lead to all kinds of crazy outcomes. On the other side of this change is peace and calm and the conditions under which society can thrive and grow. I personally think that the fun and games in gold, and particularly silver, is really just getting started. To have a supposedly safe haven asset in silver, that is also incredibly risky, incredibly volatile. I think you're going to see an awful lot of money that was in crypto and in NFTs and in AMC and all this ape money and all the stuff that's buying the double leveraged ETFs. You're going to see some truly extraordinary things happen in silver because the kind of money that's going to go into it is going to be the kind of money that just craves that risk and will chase it to who knows where.
This is Little by Little with Andy Schectman.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Little by Little, where we talk about real stuff, shaping markets, money, and the world we're all trying to navigate. Today, I am seriously excited about this conversation. My guest is someone whose work has been a major influence on how I think about macroeconomics, gold, and the bigger picture. I could not be happier to welcome in Grant Williams. He's not just a brilliant thinker. He is the mind behind things that make you go, This is a newsletter he writes, but also a presentation that I saw several years ago that actually blew my mind. He is a master at connecting history to the present, and he's one of those voices that's always made me stop and rethink my own assumptions. Grant, it's awesome to have you here, brother. Thank you so much for joining me.
Andy, the pleasure is all mine. It's an overly generous introduction, but thank you. It's it's good to see you.
Yeah, you know, some introductions are overly generous. Yours is understated, and I sincerely mean that. There are a few people in this industry that have my highest of regards and respect, and you are at the very top of that list. So,
well, you're very
kind.
kind. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and well-deserved, brother, well-deserved. So let's jump right into it out of respect for your time. In your work, Grant, especially things that make you go you have masterly combined history, markets, and human behavior, in my opinion. And with everything swirling around right now, soaring debt, geopolitical fractures, inflation, just outright confusion, what's the one thing today that makes you go, the loudest?
Oh boy, where to start? I mean, as you say, Andy, it's really hard to pick one thing. I think what I try and spend a lot of time doing when I talk to people about this stuff is just to try and make it clear that as chaotic as the world sounds and looks and feels right now, humanity has been through periods, maybe not exactly the same, but similar, and we will get through this. It feels chaotic and it feels downright scary to a lot of people. Particularly given the events of the last week or so. But at the end of the day, mankind will endure, society will endure, it'll go through struggles, and we're in the middle of one of those right now, and it's an uncomfortable place to be. But I've the last 15 years or so, I spent a lot of time reading and rereading The Fourth Turning, a tremendous book by Neil Howe and Bill Strauss. Neil's become a very good friend of mine, and I've spent hours talking to Neil about this stuff, and I found that incredibly helpful for me in terms of understanding what's gone before and the parallels in history to times like these. And it just gives you a sense. It may not be exact because it's impossible to get things exactly the same, just because of human nature. But it helps you understand that this too shall pass, and this has happened before. We got through it, and there are clear cycles throughout history that give you a sense of the fact that what we're going through now is the end of something. And I think to a lot of people, it feels like the beginning of something because that change is so painful to endure. It feels like we've had such good times. This is the beginning of an awful lot of pain. The reality is, this is the end of a build up and a postponement of reckoning that you talked about many times to your viewers and the people when you write. And that's where we are. We're in an uncomfortable period, but we're nearer the end than the beginning, and we have to get through this. And when we do, on the other side, there's 40 years probably of conditions getting better. We've just got to get from here to there, and that's the bit we're all trying to figure out right now.
Are we in the fourth turning right now? Is this
I think
the?
so.
Yeah, yeah, I think
Yeah,
so
I think
too.
so. I
I
think
think
so.
so
And
too. And
go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just say it is. I think if you look at it from that perspective, where we are going to witness substantial change, kind of a revolution, if you will, so to speak. Um, could you explain, just for people who are not really familiar with the concept of the fourth turning, without going too deep into it, where are we?
Well, look, I think we're in the acceleration phase of the fourth turning, and to do what you asked and to kind of go into it without too much detail, not get into the weeds. These turnings take between 20 and 25 years to play out. There are four of them in a cycle, which is about the length of a human life, 80 to 100 years. And there's very good reason for that. We tend to forget what happened when all the people that lived through this period, the last time it happened, have died and their stories have gone with them. We forget and we repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So this fourth turning is chaos, it's destruction, it's the tearing down of institutions that we the people feel are no longer fit for purpose, that we've lost our trust in. And you can see that happening, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's the World Health Organization after COVID, whether it's government, whether it's politicians in general, the World Bank, IMF, all of these institutions that have served us so well for such a long period of time. In this period of chaos, we look at them very differently and we decide that we no longer like the way our politicians run things. We no longer like the way the World Health Organization works. We no longer like these things. And they don't get dismantled peacefully, and there's not a vote, and we can all decide that we want to abolish government the way it is. It generally has to come through strife and conflict, and sometimes those conflicts are more serious and more far-reaching than others. Hopefully, we don't get that, but I think anyone who's alive today and is paying attention feels that conflict, whether they feel it in the headlines about Russia and Ukraine, or they feel it in the streets of their own city. I'm here in London today, and we had a big march at the weekend, which uh, is something that's being battled over in the media. It's being labelled as 100% far right protesters, as it always is. The reality is, from people I know that were there, it's nothing of the sort, or at least it wasn't exclusively that. Of course, there are far right. I'm sure there were some far left people there. Everybody's represented. But it's a sign that people are unhappy. It's a sign they want change, and that change will happen. It's just a question of how peacefully does it happen and how much conflict does it take to make it occur. But as I said, again, on the other side of this change is is peace and calm and the conditions under which society can thrive and grow again. And I think we all want to get from here to there as peaceably as possible. And we're not going to get it the way we want it, but let's hope we can do the best job we can of navigating it.
It's really strange to me, Grant. It seems that the markets are ignoring or mispricing, even, I would argue, gold. Even at these levels, the markets are, let me put it this way, the collective reasoning, the collective wisdom of the people are ignoring this. And you've said that gold isn't just a hedge, it's a signal. Is gold signaling this? And is this something that the markets are still ignoring, or, to my point, maybe even mispricing?
Yeah, I think all of the above, Andy. To be honest with you, I do, and that that sounds strange with gold nudging $3,700, when a lot of people were talking in not too distant memory about it wouldn't get through 2000, or once it did, it was going back to 1300. We're nudging 4,000 now, and it's got there very quickly, and it's certainly garnered some attention from people who weren't paying attention before. But at the end of the day, gold's a curious thing because there are a long periods of time where nobody really needs to own gold. You don't need to own it. It's never a bad thing to own, but there are periods of time when everything's calm, when you can invest your capital in more risky places with a lot more comfort than you can right now, perhaps. And so between 1999, let's call it, and 2005, nobody needed any gold. Between 1980, when inflation peaked, and 1999, nobody needed any gold, and the price reflected that. It went from 800 to 250 odd dollars. Nobody wanted to own it. But since the turn of the century, and since it became pretty clear that the path forward for just about every central bank in the world was going to be currency debasement, gold is something that it has made an awful lot of sense to own. Now, that hasn't meant a lot of people have owned it, because at the same time, stocks and shares are going up, and that's what was in the news, and that's what was on CNBC, and that's what their friends were talking about when they were telling them to buy Cisco and Intel and all these cool shares that were going up. Your bond portfolio did well, real estate was doing well, everything was doing well, and so no one really needed to focus on gold, except the people who either perhaps spent more time looking at monetary systems in general, spent more time perhaps studying Austrian economics, spent more time understanding the reason that things were going up was not necessarily because everything was great and business was booming and the markets were representing economic reality, but the fact that what they were really representing was this currency debasement. And you can see it in share prices, you can see it in asset prices, and it's being reflected in gold. But everybody understands buying houses, everybody understands buying shares, everybody understands buying bond funds. Buying gold is just that little bit of extra work. It's a little bit more complicated. And when you don't need to complicate things, people don't do it. And so that's why in the West particularly, there's a massive under-owning of gold right now, I think. And that's why you're starting to see the price move as it is, because people are trying to play catch up. It's different in the West, in the East, as you well know. Gold is much more of a way of life there. It's much more of a familiar asset to own. And so we're in that period now where investors in the West are looking at what's happening. The penny's starting to drop, and they realize that gold is, if not the solution to this, then certainly one of the primary solutions to this. And people are starting to adjust accordingly. And I personally think that the fun and games in gold, and particularly silver, is really just getting started, because people are still trading it. Once we get to the phase where people realize that they have to own it, things change dramatically, because when people want to own it, it's not for sale. And that could lead to some real interesting moves.
Couldn't agree with you more. I'm going to get to silver in a minute, and that's really what I'm talking about. We've seen gold reach these levels, which, maybe from the outside, people think, wow, it's toppy, it's at all-time highs, which I agree with, or disagree with rather, because the people printing the money, the people setting the rules, seem to be the ones that have been buying it all along, the central bankers. But now we see this massive drive into the United States, who's become net importers of gold, and literally month over month over month over month since November, since the election, the amount of gold coming into this country is truly off the charts. It's an anomaly from anything that I have ever seen. It's funny, our mutual friend Rick Rule will still say, I interviewed him a few months ago, and he said, Andy, his exact term was, from Joe and Jane's six-pack to the Harvard Endowment Fund, the allocation of gold and gold-related equities is 0.5%. I find it ironic that the Harvard Endowment Fund just bought over $100 million worth of gold, literally just a couple of weeks ago. And it's interesting because just recently we've seen business really start to accelerate. But this entire run-up, and that's kind of what I was getting at, this entire run-up has been void of any retail, really meaningful participation. And maybe we are starting to transition into a collective awakening. I guess we will see. To your point about silver, it often plays second fiddle to gold. Yet it bridges both the industrial utility and the monetary symbolism for those of us that understand the monetary side of it. In today's fragile environment, this fiscal fragile environment, do you see silver charting its own path or remaining tightly coupled to gold's fate?
Well, I think silver is going to be really interesting this time around because previously when silver has had its moment in the sun, it's generally followed gold, and it's more speculative. We understand that the industrial uses of it waver over time. They vary over time, and the end of silver as an industrial metal has been called more times than I can imagine, but that's simply not the case. But what's going to be interesting this time is when money starts to move into silver. The money that moves into gold is generally speaking cautious money. Yes, there is some speculative froth in gold. Yes, there are people who see the momentum it has and are trading the momentum. I get that. But generally speaking, when money moves into silver, um, it's 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 more risk tolerant. Let's put it that way. And because of what's happening right now and what has happened for the last 10 years, you've had this extraordinary explosion of appetite for risk because of the way central banks have managed markets, managed interest rates to provide that safety net every time markets look like they're going to fall. People are much more comfortable taking risk. And in fact, because of the advent of crypto and NFTs and all the kind of highly, highly speculative stuff, you have an entire generation of investors who crave the most risky thing they can possibly find. And we can talk about it being this idea of financial nihilism, where they don't believe unless they get the 100 bagger that they're ever going to get the ability to buy a house or start a family or all those things, which, I understand those feelings. But the money that's going into gold traditionally is money that's coming out of equities. It's people that are nervous about equity markets. So to have a supposedly safe haven asset in silver that is also incredibly risky, incredibly volatile, I think you're going to see an awful lot of money that was in crypto and in NFTs and in AMC and all this ape money and all the stuff that's buying the double leveraged ETFs. Once they see silver moving, uh, and you can make the case that by buying silver, I'm being more prudent, but look at the vol. I think you're going to see some truly extraordinary things happen in silver because the kind of money that's going to go into it is going to be the kind of money that just craves that risk and will chase it to who knows where.
Yeah, if you look at the vault holdings in London with less than a day's worth of trading as a free float, um, I would think that fireworks certainly would be in order if we see this massive surge of investor demand on top of the smart money seeming to move ahead, and that is what we're
Well, I mean,
seeing.
Andy, I hate to interrupt, but it's not the massive investor money that's going to drive it. It's the massive speculator money, and I want to make the differentiation between those two things. So I think it's really important. People invest in gold for the long term. And yes, there are traders, yes, but silver is such a speculative asset. It's going to pull in an enormous amount of purely speculative capital. And once we start seeing, the double long silver ETF get launched, which we will, and the triple long silver ETF get launched, which we will, then I think you're going to really see some things happen. I mean, ultimately, it will end in tears, but for the time being, it's going to be a glorious ride for the people who are willing to strap themselves in and enjoy it.
So would you think that massive speculation by the younger group would be more symbolic of the end of the fourth turning or the beginning of the first?
I think, and it's much more the former, because at the beginning of a first turning, you're rebuilding from the rubble of the fourth turning. And so, I think as the speculative capital flows in, it is the end, the blow off top, if you will, of this speculative bubble, of this fourth turning. It's the money chasing those crazy returns that they're promised, just as the economic reality is starting to run on fumes. So I think there will be an immense crash. Um, we don't know when it's going to come. We don't know the nature. We don't know what's going to trigger it. But the amount of leverage in the system, the degree of overvaluation, and the pure speculative fervor that's in there, and that speculative money is always very skittish when you get to the end, and it can lead to all kinds of crazy outcomes. But this is the end of the fourth turning, or the build up to the end of the fourth turning. The first turning will be people not wanting to own a single share, not wanting to own a single bond, wanting to have their cash in the bank, wanting to own gold, and speculation will be a four-letter word. So that's what you can expect once the fourth turning's over and the first turning's begun. But from there it's all upward. So the sooner we get there, the better, frankly.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Shawshank Redemption, the movie where Andy Dufresne had to crawl through a tube of crap for a
That's
mile or
right.
so to get to the other end. I think it's scary when you think about the fourth turning. It really is scary when you think about the rubble, the chaos. But hopefully we're all trying to do what we can to get people to prepare for that best they can. And speaking of changes, speaking of shifts in power, de-dollarization, something I've been talking about for 4 years or 5 now, has moved from fringe theory to really reality, I guess. And from the BRICS initiatives to trade deals that are actively bypassing the dollar. In your mind, Grant, how real is this shift, and what could it mean for the future of the global monetary system? Precious metals, maybe gold pegged to it over the next decade. What do you see coming?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating discussion, and there's a lot of people focused on it. But the best analogy I can think of is when you've got termites eating your house. Your house looks great, and you swear to God it's in great shape, and it's the best looking house in the neighborhood. And then one day the whole thing falls apart
Mm-hmm.
because that one termite takes that one bite out of the wood that weakens it to a point of collapse, and it collapses. And I think when we look at the dollar as a reserve currency, the termites are eating away at it. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to collapse imminently like that metaphorical house. It doesn't mean um, it's going to go away as a major trade currency. But the incentives have changed. The incentives have changed since Russia invaded Ukraine, and I've talked about this a lot. That the week that they froze those Russian central bank assets back in 2022, I wrote a piece called "The End of the Financial World as We Know It," and my point then was the very fact the United States did that and froze another central bank's sovereign assets completely realigned all the incentives for every central bank in the world. And I mean every single one, because obviously, with the dollar being the world's reserve currency and the world's energy currency, there isn't a central bank in the world that doesn't own dollar reserves because they either have to import energy, in which case they need dollars to pay for it, or export energy, in which case they receive dollars for it. So everybody owns some degree of dollar reserves. And you have, at a stroke of a pen, told every single one of those central banks that there are circumstances which we can't define, under which we will impair your sovereign assets. And we've just proven what they are. And in Russia's case, it's because they crossed the Ukraine border. We can't guarantee you what those circumstances are for your particular country, but you can no longer assume with 100% certainty that there is no chance we will ever do that. And as soon as you do that, again, incentives change. And every single one of those central banks now, as a matter of national security, has to have a plan B so that there is no way that their sovereign assets, their sovereign currency reserves can be impaired by another government. And from that day to this, we have seen that taking place. Those of us who watch the gold market have seen it taking place in plain sight. The amount of buying of gold by central banks has gone through the roof, and with good reason. We can see the fact that other countries are trying to divest themselves of reliance upon the dollar. It doesn't mean they're going to stop using the dollar. It means at the margin, as and where they can, they will reduce their dependency on it. For some, that is selling treasury bonds and buying gold. For others, it's trying to arrange trade deals in their own currency or the currencies of their trade partners without going through the dollar. There are all kinds of ways of doing it. It's undeniable that that's happening. It's also undeniable that so far it hasn't made a difference, except at the margin. But it's also undeniable that every house that collapses from termites, until it collapses, looks fine from the outside. So I think this process is underway. It's not going to happen imminently. And that's not to say there isn't some way the United States can, regain the good faith and the trust of the world. It's not a 0% chance, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And in the meantime, until they find a way to actively gain that trust back, and that's not an easy thing to do in these circumstances, until they do that, until the day they do that, everybody is looking at how we can diversify away from the dollars, how we can be less reliant on the dollar, how we can be less vulnerable to United States policy. So it's happening. It just hasn't shown up yet. It hasn't made a material difference yet. But the numbers tell a different story that bit by bit, piece by piece, people are moving away from the dollar.
Or little by little. That's right,
Or
exactly.
little by little. There you go.
Yeah.
I should have given you the plug, shouldn't I?
Yeah, well, and that speaks to logarithmic decay, little by little by little, then bang. And I see so many things. We'll save that for another discussion, but so many things happening with the BRICS that are largely being ignored by the mainstream,
Yeah.
and even by folks in this industry that are ignoring what's happening very quietly, some really substantial things that are happening. So we'll save that for our next conversation. But part of
Well, Andy, I think it's worth pointing out because that's such a great point you make there. The response has generally been, as each BRICS summit comes and goes, people say, well, they didn't announce a BRICS currency, so clearly it's a load of old rubbish. But as you say, there are little agreements being made here. There are rails being put in place, payment rails being put in place. There are swaps being put in place. All this stuff is happening. And whilst it doesn't give you a really easy headline that says, okay, I need to do something now because look at what that headline says, things have changed. If you're paying attention, all of these little things that get agreed and signed and handshakes and photo opportunities, the one thing they have in common is they're moving in that direction away from the dollar. And people need to understand that.
Yeah, one of the things that most people have missed, just to put an exclamation point on that, is their bridge system, M-Bridge, that was designed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia as a full participant. And it's gone quiet because of what the Bank of International Settlements did at the 12th hour by pulling out, saying we can't be involved. Their innovation hub helped design it with largely Chinese technology, but they pulled out at the 12th hour saying, well, we can't be involved with any country or any technology where a country could sidestep Western sanctions. And it's as if they just realized that Russia was the R in BRICS after 4 years of developing the technology. But what the biggest thing to me, Grant, that people are missing is Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, just came out recently and said that BRICS Pay, which is the B2B side of things, which is the retail side, and BRICS Bridge, which is the central bank to central bank, is now being opened up to the rest of the world with the exception of the US, the UK, and the European Union. In other words, they're right now integrating it into the Belt Road, which is 75% of human population. Everyone focuses just on this little BRICS growing group, not substantial enough yet. They're opening this up, this cross-border payment system where countries, to your point, trade in local currencies, settle imbalances in gold, to effectively 90% of human population. And that's been missed by the West. And I think it is just beginning. I urge people to stay on top of that, keep following. I'll certainly do all I can to keep people alert to it. But part of this deal, this change, maybe a new monetary system, I would argue happened with the passage of the so-called Genius Act, where effectively we are creating synthetic demand for U.S. treasuries. And not so much digging into that particular question, but digging into the reality, do you think that perhaps with the passage of the Genius Act, where all of these institutions and banks will be issuing stablecoins, where perhaps through legislation, I would argue, that the powers that be, the Fed, will be able to monitor the on-ramp and the off-ramp. Are we sleepwalking into a digital fiat trap? And is gold maybe the only exit sign still lit? More so the first part of that question. Do you believe that we are moving into a digital surveillance state with the digital ID needed to vote, and with this new passage of the Genius Act, where everything's going to be about stablecoins, not so much about checks and wires, more so about stablecoin issuance? Are you concerned about that at all?
Well, it's interesting, just the way you phrase the question, and I think the way you phrase the question is the way people frame it in their own minds. Are we moving towards a digital surveillance system? And if you take those words literally, the answer is an undeniable yes, because everything that's happening is taking things digital, is giving access to our data. It's happening. But when people say those words, what they mean is, are we going to end up in a digital surveillance system? Because the question is an easy one to answer. Yes, that's where we're headed. The question is, where do we end up? And is part of the fourth turning a repudiation of this intrusion into personal freedoms? And it may be, or it may be that Gen Z particularly are very happy to give up their data. They're very happy to give up everything, right? I mean, that it's well known, well documented. I think Gen X, my generation, and probably yours, we're the last kind of holdouts of reasonably suspicious, reasonably private people who would rather the government stay out of our lives. The millennials are kind of the bridge, and the Gen Z have welcomed them in. They don't want cash. They don't want to use cash. They'd much rather be able to use their phone for everything. And that comes back to this idea of fourth turning, right? Because it's you forget the history, you forget what unchanneled power in the hands of government can do, and what lack of privacy can do. And Gen Z haven't experienced that. Our generation heard the stories from our parents and our grandparents, and so we have an awareness of it. And sadly, the majority of Gen Z don't resort to reading history the way we did, because they've got so many more distractions than we did. When I was a kid, we had 3 TV channels, all of which carried a load of rubbish or books, and that was it. So we read a lot of books. And as time has gone on and attention spans have gotten shorter, and entertainment thrown at you, which is purely frivolous, is impossible to avoid, it stands to reason. So, I think that's where we're headed. I don't know that's where we end up. I hope not. I hope that as part of this fourth turning, there is a repudiation of government intrusion into people's life and personal liberty. Certainly, I'm all for that. But it remains to be seen. The important thing for people to realize is that is the direction of travel. And so if you want to embrace that, that's fine. If it's something you fear, if it's something that makes you nervous, you don't want to give up, then you have to try and fight it every step of the way. You have to try and resist giving up your information wherever you can. And sometimes it's not possible to do that. But if you are aware and concerned about it, then you have to fight every little battle, and it's going to be exhausting. But you may just win out in the end. The rest of society may come around to understanding the dangers inherent in giving government too much power, as society has multiple times in the past. But again, we're here. We've got to get to there, and the only way out is through. And we don't know what through means just yet, and it could be ugly.
You're a fascinating guy, Grant, and I like the way that you are like a storyteller, and people remember stories much more so than they remember facts and figures.
I agree with that.
Last question for you. When the history books are written about this era, and if indeed we are heading towards some reset, or nearing the end of a monetary era, the fourth turning, what do you believe will define the investors who not only survive but thrive on the other side of the reset? What do we need to do to get to the other side, because as you mentioned, there will be a lot of rubble, a lot of chaos, a lot of fear, a lot of everything that doesn't sound too pleasant. But Andy Dufresne, when he got through the tube of crap, he stood there like this with the rain pouring on him, and then he ended up on a beach fixing a boat, and the story ended happily. Will there be a way for people to get to the other side of this, whatever is coming, or the end of the fourth turning, to find something positive at the beginning of the next cycle? What do they need to do? What will define that person who is able to make it to the other side, if you're able to answer such a tough question?
Yeah, and I think your point about stories, I wholeheartedly agree with that, Andy. I think, and so I will tell you a story that will help people understand this in a second. But there's a the easiest way to describe it is you've had 25 years of offense. You're playing offense for 25 years. You can go on the front foot. You can take risk. That environment has changed, and so if you want to survive, and it's interesting that you use that word. You use that word before thrive. You say, how do we survive and thrive? Well, in order to thrive, you have to survive first. So it's time to think about survival. And if you want to survive anything, you take less risk, not more, right? If you really want to survive, you take as little risk as is prudent. I won't say no risk because it's always appropriate to take some, um, but it's time to think about how do I protect what I have. Let's not think about how do I double it, how do I triple it, how do I 10x my money. How do I protect what I have? And there's a line in Wall Street, and everybody knows the line about greed is good, and if you want a friend, get a dog, and all those great Gordon Gekko lines. But to me, the best line in that film comes near the end when Daryl Hannah's character says to what's her name, Darian, says to Charlie Sheen's character, she says, Bud, having money and losing it is worse than never having had it at all. And it's so true. If you've worked these last 20 years and you've taken risk and you've accumulated wealth, to give it back now because you got careless or you took too many risks on would be the worst thing you could do. So I'm going to tell you the story just to give you a sense of how to maybe think about what thriving and surviving looks like. In the US Civil War, down in Charleston, South Carolina, where the war first started in Fort Sumter, there was a local guy called George Walton Williams, no relation, sadly. And George Walton Williams was a gun runner. And he would run guns to both sides before the Union, the Confederacy, before the war started and through the war. But he would only accept payment in gold and silver. He refused to accept dollars. He refused to accept Confederate dollars. He would only be paid in gold and silver. And the U.S. was on a gold standard around that time, so it was an easy thing to do to insist on gold and silver. It wasn't like it is today, where people wouldn't know the first thing about how to pay you in gold or silver. And so the Civil War starts in Charleston Harbor, and for a gun runner, business is good. Business is booming, literally. And so he ran guns to both sides, and he took payment in gold and silver from both sides. And at the end of the Civil War, the South falls, the war's over, and every single Confederate dollar that had been printed by the South to finance their war effort was worth zero overnight. And George Walton Williams didn't have any Confederate dollars. All he had was gold and silver. And so, literally overnight, at the end of the Civil War, he became the richest man in Charleston, not because he got rich, but because everybody else got poor. He stayed exactly where he was, and everybody got poor. And so, with that gold and silver, he bought all the banks in town. He built the biggest mansion. It's still there in Charleston. If anyone goes to Charleston, it's one of my favorite cities in the world. It's beautiful. It's called the Calhoun Mansion, right in downtown Charleston. He became the wealthiest man in Charleston overnight because he just stayed rich. He held on to what he had. He didn't give it away like everybody else did. And so that story, there's so many lessons in that about times like this, times of unrest, times of strife, times of conflict. You hang on to what you have because people and circumstance are going to try and take it away from you. And governments are going to try and take it away from you through taxes, through financial repression, through everything. Hang on to what you've accumulated through these incredible bull market years and make the first thing you think about is how do I maintain what I have? How do I stay wealthy? How do I not end up poor because I took too much risk or I left myself in a position where people could take my money away. So there's a story for you, which, as I say, I think is a really apropos one for now, and is filled with plenty of lessons. Plus, it's a great story to tell.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that one. Absolutely. I've never heard that one before. Grant, you're amazing, and I really appreciate you joining me today and sharing your perspective. It's been incredibly insightful. What's the best way for people to follow your insights on a day-to-day basis, other than reading things that make me go hum? What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing?
Very easy, two ways. There's one website, grant-williams.com, and my Twitter handle is at TTMYGH, which is just the acronym for things that make you go home, in case you can't remember it. TTMYGH. That's it.
Fantastic, Grant. Again, thank you so very much. I'll look forward to seeing you again in person at Jay Martin's conference in Vancouver. Hopefully you'll be there in January. It's one of the two that I never miss. And just can't thank you enough, my man. I hope you stay well. And until next time, I'll look forward to picking up where we left off.
Andy, it's a great pleasure. I appreciate you sparing me the time, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, mate.
Likewise. Stay well, buddy.
Yes.
This is Little by Little with Andy Schectman.